All right. I want the full 50 minutes to go through as many questions as we can. If we run out of things to do, I have exam 3 you can go over. If we don't get to that and you'd like to check your score, you're welcome to do that. I'll be around after class for those 10 minutes as well as up in my office for the next hour. So, what questions do people have?
How close it is to exam 3?
That's a good one.
Because it feels like it has a similar format as exam 3 setting up, but I don't do the exact same exam twice.
No, there are some different focuses.
Okay.
So it's not just gonna be exactly the same format as 3 with more. You should know more than that.
But some of the ideas from the last exam will be in this one as well, is that how I understand? Like,
At a very, very, very high level. So I'll be targeting only design patterns as a whole. Otherwise, the patterns that you had an exam on will not show up at that level of depth.
I'm assuming observer, adapter, facade, and command are gonna be bigger portions than the cumulative.
Yes, the idea is that I try to have equal distribution of all material in terms of the associated grade weight. So there are fewer design patterns on this, and I need to test them at the same level, give them the same approximate number of points in an exam setting as the other patterns that we've covered. So yeah, more focus will be on the patterns than on the cumulative section.
Since it's a higher level, do you expect the same level of coding as was on exam 3?
There wasn't too much coding.
Yeah, like.
Yeah, it was more,
was there any?
does it adhere to the pattern or not? The kinds of cumulative things you might see is, here's a problem. Find which pattern would be a reasonable solution to this, explain why. Or here's the before and after as a pattern was applied, what pattern was applied and how does that help the code? Those are the kinds of application questions that I would ask you and not write the code for a particular design pattern.
Will it be as packed as exam 3 was? Because that was until the last minute.
For 1 hour, possibly.
Is it 1 hour?
I designed it to be 1 hour and not 2 hours. So you have 2 hours to do what I anticipate being about a 1 hour exam.
So is it weighted more than another test, or is it just
Nope,
another
it's
test?
just another test. This is exam 4. 1/4 of the exam categories.
It starts at 1, correct?
Yeah, 1 to 3 on Monday.
For our answers, do you want it to be like super in-depth then, because there's not like as much content like covering?
That's usually the case in general. I do prefer answers that show that you know what you're talking about. It's not just a 1 word or 1 phrase or even 1 sentence answer. Actually walk me through the logic of your thinking. I find myself writing vague on lots of exams or coaxing the TA to write vague on lots of exams because I can't tell. You haven't proven that you know it. I think that you know it based on what's there, but you haven't proven it based on what's on the page. I have what's on the page to work with. So make sure that you are as thorough as you can be while still giving yourself enough time to complete the exam. Take time to think out your response before you start writing, usually is good. That way it doesn't seem as rambly. Other questions?
So
Yeah.
in the exam 3, it was asking to give a real life example that is not studied in the class and not in the lecture and all those things. In that short time, like thinking about something else that was kind of similar was not that easy.
Yeah,
unless it was like very close related.
Sure,
Is this exam gonna have that's kind of similar?
maybe.
Real life?
Possibly.
I reserve the right to ask those kinds of questions.
Okay.
I'm not saying study that and only that,
Yeah.
that won't do you as well, that won't do you well either, but I reserve the right for you to. You should know how to apply the pattern to some kind of example and be able to say, what do I know about the pattern? When should I be able to apply this? What would an example of that?
Or vice versa, if you give us some.
Yeah. Here's an example, give us a pattern. Good exam. What a nice exam that I've written.
For the cumulative, it's every single past exam about the design pattern.
I would say not at the same level of depth. I would say that it's gonna target either design patterns as a whole or the application of those patterns. So I could say something like, here's a code snippet. What design pattern could be used to improve it? And the correct answers to this question would be something that was on a previous exam. But I won't ask you anything like the duck superclass, write code for the duck superclass of a pattern that was on a past exam. So just be able to know the subset of patterns that we covered in detail, how to apply them, know their UML diagrams, be able to map that to problems, real life problems, to code, to be ready for that level of application.
I would assume you would put more emphasis on the ones that we have done labs for, than the ones that were just briefly covered in exam.
Maybe. I would say know them all.
Yeah.
I will have more confidence asking more in-depth questions on the ones we've had labs for. But you should be able to have examples, know how to. When to apply them to code, not exactly how necessarily, we don't really have time for. Apply this pattern to this code. But if you describe to the process, I would want you to be able to describe the process of how to implement a pattern, any pattern that we've covered in lecture to a code example. At a high level, like you need to make these classes, you need to have these relationships between these classes, this accomplishes that. That's the level of depth and detail. I wouldn't ask more than that. Other questions?
So the results of that final exam will be released a week from that exam.
Hopefully. I will need to make sure that Canvas is updated prior to grades being due. Grades are due the Tuesday following exam week. So that's when I will know absolutely everything about grades, including any curve that I add to the class. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions about grading. If you'd like to see the final exam, I can arrange for that. I can come in and talk to you about that, let you see it ahead of grades being due. But I don't know exactly when it will be graded.
Would you be around before the final? Like.
On
if you wanted to
Monday?
Check on,
Yeah, I wanna be here a good chunk before the final exam, just so that I like to hang out in the classroom whenever I can and have availability, and since it's the end of the quarter, I don't have planning for next week to do, except for grading. Woo. So my plan will be to be in the classroom half an hour before the exam starts and in my office probably an hour before that, at least an hour before that. So assume that I will be here by at least 11, if not earlier than that.
So you'll be at the office 11 to 12, and then half an hour before.
Yeah, then I'll move down to the classroom and try to answer any questions that come up while you're studying in the classroom so that I can draw out anything I want to on the board ahead of the exam.
What do you think the difficulty of this one is compared to the last one or any previous attempts?
I try to make it about the same.
What do you personally feel?
I personally feel that it's about the same, and I feel like that will vary different or very vastly from student to student. Some student will say, that was the easiest exam you've ever given me, and some student will say, that exam was horribly unfair and now I hate you. And I would expect everything in between as well. So I know better than to take my personal view of it and assume that you're gonna feel the same way about it. Yeah.
If we think about all these design patterns that we went through in the class, if we were to select like just 3 of them for real life to master those ones, which one those would be, like, or it depends.
Really good question. The easier ones are easier to pick up, so if I had to focus on them, I would pick the more difficult ones that have more difficult components. So I would probably pick factory as something that is widely applicable, but also is similar enough to patterns like builder and prototype that they're close enough that I could learn the others from learning factory. So like factory is a really good one to focus on. The most widely used one is probably something like strategy. So strategy is something that I would want to know really, really well, because you should be able to apply it and know when to go use it really quickly. Adapter is probably on that same boat. It's very, very common, but also not very difficult to implement. What else that we covered would be really important? Singleton is pretty important and widely used for a lot of applications, and I think that if you don't consider the thread safety of it, then you'll get people who yell at you in your own company. That's something that we need to think about. That's tough though, because they all relate to each other and they all are useful in very different situations. Yeah, I'd say factory for a creational pattern. I would say that's tough. It's tough past factory. I think that is kind of like the quintessential creational pattern. It probably also just depends on what you end up doing or want to do. A lot of the different patterns are going to be relevant for different kinds of applications. So if you find yourself in a particular role, you'll find yourself applying different kinds of design patterns more frequently to your solutions. So thinking about what role you end up at or want to do with your CS degree, that might inform what kinds of design patterns to go study in more depth and detail as well. Other questions? Just want to get it over with.
I just feel like it's pretty similar, like what we've had before. So
Yeah.
I kind of know what I need to study, but I just need to know what the focus is.
I think it's pretty straightforward. I feel like if I printed them and handed them out right now, it wouldn't be horribly different from doing it on Monday. I do think you all are pretty prepared for this. There's not too much else that needs to be said or done.
How many points is it?
There are 117 points. It'll be graded out of 100, and on top of those 117 possible points, there are 10 gimme points that everyone is going to get. That's on top of the 117. So lots of points on the final. I expect this to be hopefully part of the grade curve that is going to be at the end of the quarter. I don't like to, wherever possible, curve everybody the same amount. I like to make people earn that curve. So that's why I have exams that are worth more than 100 points. Is those aren't free points, except there are 10 free points on this exam. But it's like, show me you know it, and that becomes the curve. And that way, if you don't know it, you don't get the curve. If you do know it, you do get the curve. And the more you know, the more curve you get. That to me is more fair than just curving everybody the same amount. But I will curve everybody the same amount at the end of the quarter if I'm still not happy with the grades. I have not yet taught a course where I was perfectly happy with the grades at the end of the quarter. So every course that I've taught has had a curve. We feel all set? There's no other questions?
Current moment.
I'm just thinking about that exam sitting on my desk.
You've already looked at it though, right?
I have.
Yeah.
Not from 212.
Just me.
All right, well, we can focus on that. I'll stop the recording since I think this is the end of the questions. And we can talk about the exam.